The rain had started before dawn and never quite stopped. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, patient rain that tapped against the lodge windows and softened the edges of the field outside. Inside, the fire in the big stone fireplace burned low and steady, warming the room in that deep, old-fashioned way that feels earned. The group had gathered in a loose circle, some in chairs, some on cushions near the hearth, some cross-legged on the rug. Coats hung over the backs of chairs to dry. Boots had been lined up by the door. Pearl lay stretched near Joyce's feet, pretending to nap, but clearly alert to every shift in the room. Francis stood near the fireplace, one hand resting lightly on the mantel. Before we begin walking, he said, before we receive ashes on Wednesday, and before the road narrows, this is the week to decide. He let that settle. You've listened, you've reflected, you've done the small exercises we talked about, watching what draws you, what distracts you, what unsettles you. So let me ask you, what did you notice? Liam spoke first, hesitantly. I realized how often I reach for noise. Podcasts, music, news. I don't think I've sat in silence for more than a few minutes in years. Francis nodded, not correcting, not approving, just receiving. And when you sat without it, he asked gently, it felt, uncomfortable, I guess, but also clearer. Clearer, how? I could hear my own thoughts, and some of them weren't pleasant. Francis smiled slightly. That's often where Lent begins. Maria leaned forward. I kept noticing impatience, small things, interruptions, delays. I don't think of myself as impatient, but man, did I feel it. And what does that point toward? Francis asked. She hesitated. Maybe giving up control, or at least my illusion of it? Joyce laughed softly. If you figure out how to give that up, tell the rest of us. There was gentle laughter, the kind that binds rather than deflects. Francis turned to her. And you, Joyce? I was thinking about comfort, she admitted. Not in a dramatic way, just how quickly I rearrange my day to avoid inconvenience. And on pilgrimage, Francis asked, what happens to comfort? You would know. Harriman answered this time, it's not the priority. Francis nodded. So whatever you give up, whatever you choose, it should do something very specific. It should make room. It should train your attention. It should prepare you for walking. He moved his gaze slowly around the circle. If you give up something that doesn't cost you anything, you'll learn very little. If you give up something dramatic but disconnected from your real struggles, you'll exhaust yourself without growing. Sean spoke up. So, how do we know the difference? Francis considered him for a moment. Ask yourself, does this touch my attachments? Does this uncover something in me? And will it help me love more freely by Easter? There was quiet after that, not heavy, but thoughtful. Aoife, who had been sitting near the window, said softly, I think I need to give up defending myself in conversations. I justify, I explain, even when no one's attacking me. Francis tilted his head slightly. And what would it look like to fast from that? To let silence stand, to trust that I don't need to correct every misunderstanding. And how will that serve you on the road? She smiled faintly. It will keep me from wasting energy. Francis nodded. That sounds like pilgrimage. They continued like this, each person naming something, Francis asking not to test them, but to refine their thinking. Why this? What fruit do you hope for? What might tempt you to quit? How will you return to it when you fail? He was listening, really listening, as Liam finished a thought about fasting from criticism when something shifted in the room. No announcement had been made that morning, and yet people felt it almost at once, the way a room feels different before a door even opens. Conversation slowed. Someone looked up from their hands. Pearl lifted her head and gave a low, curious snort, as if she sensed a familiar presence drawing near. Francis noticed first. He was really listening to Liam when his expression changed. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. the kind that comes when something long awaited finally arrives. He turned just as she came into view. Claire did not enter dramatically. She never did. She walked as though she belonged wherever she was, unhurried, attentive, fully present. Her habit was simple, her posture unassuming, but there was a steadiness about her that made space around her feel quieter, more ordered. She carried nothing in her hands, and yet it felt as if she brought something essential with her. Francis, who had been sitting sprawled out on the hearth, stood slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The history between them, shared prayer, shared labor, shared suffering, hung gently in the air like incense that had not yet dispersed. You came, Francis said at last, his voice warm with something close to relief. I did, Claire answered. Her smile was small, but it reached her eyes. It seemed time. The group watched the exchange with interest and an instinctive trust. Whatever this was, it mattered. Francis turned to them then, one hand open in Claire's direction. Friends, he said, this is Claire. A murmur moved through the circle. Names repeated softly, nods exchanged, smiles offered and returned. She'll be walking with us from here, Francis continued, not as a guest, as family. Claire inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the weight of that word without embellishing it. I'm glad to be here, she said simply. I've been praying for you already. That alone seemed to settle something in the group. Francis looked around the group again, but now his gaze carried a new depth. We were speaking of Lent, he said, his tone easy but steady, of what each of you will lay down. He gestured gently toward Claire. Claire understands something about laying things down, not theatrically, not impulsively, but deliberately. Claire met his eyes briefly, then looked toward the group. What you give up, she said quietly, is less important than why you give it up. If it leads you toward greater love, keep it. If it only makes you proud of your sacrifice, reconsider. There was no sharpness in her voice, only clarity. Francis smiled. You see why I'm glad she's here. Soft laughter moved through the room again, but it carried relief now, direction. Aoife patted the couch next to her. There was room for Claire to sit, and Claire came over and sat down. Later, as the rain continued its patient rhythm against the windows and people drifted into smaller conversations, testing their ideas, refining them, Claire sat beside Maria on the hearth and listened. She asked few questions, but the one she asked went to the heart. Why does that matter to you? What are you afraid will happen if you let it go? What do you hope God might do in that space? That evening, as the light softened and the talk turned toward Ash Wednesday, Francis stood beside her. We'll begin soon, he said quietly. The road changes after that. Claire nodded. It always does. Are you ready? She looked out over the group, some eager, some nervous, some already tired, all willing. I am, she said, and so are they, even if they don't know it yet. Francis smiled. 2 days before Ash Wednesday, the pilgrimage had not yet begun, but now, unmistakably, it had.